right then. So again, moving on to the very first thing. So here, I don't know if you guys can make out what is going on over here. Can you guys see who is?
Uh,
Yes, right here. Hopefully you can see my cursor. In the middle is one of the goldenrod crab spiders. We have two species, and again, many of the facts and so forth. They're not so. It's not that they're uncommon or anything like that, but sometimes you don't know it, and sometimes they can become invisible, as it were. In this case, this spider is kind of interesting because it can change color. It can change color to a yellow color, like if it's on goldenrod, or in this case, much more in this color if it's on if it happens to be on. In this case, it's a milkweed. It can change to white. It can change to brown. Again, a neat little thing, and it can change colors. And amongst all the spiders, this particular the crab spiders and as well as the jumping spiders have the best eyesight, and so they can tell different colors and they can match them as best they can, and that of course helps quite a bit. Now, I want you guys to notice here something interesting. You guys notice what this might be? And I know at first it might look like it's a bee, but it actually is not, because how many bees would be eating a beetle? This actually is a very interesting sort of animal. It's actually one of the robber flies, and it's a bumblebee mimic robber fly. So, so this thing looks like a a bumblebee. And why would it do that? Well, because bees sting, and so that's one way of getting protection. And a lot of things aren't that afraid of bees, and so he this way he can get closer to his prey, as it were. It's interesting because another name for robber flies are bee wolves, and sometimes these guys will set up right near beehives and pick off the worker bees as they're coming back and forth. But again, this is very interesting. There are a variety of different kinds of flies that are very good at mimicking other things. In this case, this is one of the very, very good robber fly mimics that mimics bumblebees. And if you were just to look at except for maybe not noticing how short the antennae are or anything like that, or how big the eyes are, typical of flies, this is, it looks just like a bumblebee. So a fantastic mimic. And this allows it to go through there. But there's tons of other mimics. So for example, here is just a combination of mostly syrphid flies, but other flies that are mimicking other types of things. So we've got down here on the bottom left, here's a yellow jacket mimic. And then you have different kinds of bee mimics. These are all syrphid flies. Here is a drone fly, another a mimic. And again, they look just like bees. Why? Because bees do sting, and that's a measure of protection. Because these guys can't possibly defend themselves, so they have to be very careful by mimicking something else that something will not eat them. And you see here is another another bumblebee, another bee mimic. And this is the only one. It is not a syrphid fly in this collection. The one I'm circling is a bee fly, and this one comes out in the springtime. And it's very interesting. So I'll explain the lifestyle on both of these. Let's start with the bee fly real quick right here. Comes out in the springtime, looks like a bee, thus the name bee fly. Has a very long proboscis because what it does, it also nectars, like all these other things do, on flowers. This is kind of definitely what you would call a bee in sheep's clothing, as it were, because a wolf in sheep's clothing, because it does something very neat. It actually is a parasitoid of bees, ground nesting bees. So it actually finds ground nesting bees, and they're all solitary bees. So it finds the mother, and when the mother leaves, it launches its eggs down into the burrow, and inside there out hatches the little grub, the little maggot, the little baby fly, and it consumes both the pollen and so forth that's been collected, as well as eating the little bee. And then what comes out is something that protects itself by looking like a bee. So quite an interesting little life cycle on this. Here is a bee fly that parasitizes on bees and then looks like a bee and the end of it. Now, as far as these other ones, all of these other syrphid flies, they're actually very beneficial because I don't know if people notice this, but after bees, which are absolutely the best pollinators in the animal world, the second best, believe it or not, are flies. Flies are actually remarkably good at actually pollinating plants. And these are beneficial. These syrphid flies are especially beneficial. It's particularly this one, which is one that I've raised before, because it not only is a good pollinator, but when it's born, it actually is it actually preys on things in your garden, things like aphids and scale and things like that. And so this is a doubly good type of thing because it's beneficial as a predator in the mornings, and then when it's full grown, it becomes a pollinator. So I'll tell you what, I'll stop right there. If there's any questions about these first couple of slides, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll continue on.
There are no questions in the chat at the moment.
So we will continue. And again, we'll leave the world of syrphid flies and their bee mimics and move on to the next interesting little natural phenomenon. And that is this. We have a lot of native orchids, and this is a particularly showy one. Many of the lady slipper orchids, named lady slipper because to someone's imagination, sometimes also called moccasin flower, it looks like a little slipper. The flower does. These are remarkably neat little plants for a bunch of different reasons. They actually trick things like bees and stuff and going in here. They don't actually provide much of a reward, but if the animal goes in there and carries the pollen from one to another, that's what it's pollinated. Now, these are things though, if you ever see orchids, native orchids on sale, I urge you not to purchase them because they've been, for the most part, ripped off from the wild. This is actually an interesting orchid because it has a mutual relationship with fungi. And without the fungi on it, this flower does not survive for very long. So if somebody were to take this plant and dig it up and move it somewhere else, which unfortunately has happened. I've been there, for example, in Linden. I always take groups to go see plants and so forth. And one day I talked to one of the rangers and he was really upset because he said, I hope you guys realize that there's a lot fewer orchids now because somebody had dug up several of the orchids and was taking them out of there. And they got caught by the rangers. And the bad news is, even though they replanted them, they probably have ruined the connection that they have with the different kind of mycorrhizal fungi that they need. And so those had died. So again, this is an important type of thing. Many plants have incredibly important relationship with fungi. And in some cases, and lady slippers are a good example, without the fungi, they cannot survive. They have to have the fungi. If the fungi doesn't develop along with the flower, then the flower dies. And again, that kind of goes on to this. So 90% of the world's plants have a positive relationship with fungi. And in fact, 80% of them cannot survive without them. And so when we're restoring plants and things like that, sometimes it's very important to amend the soils and so forth so that there is the right kinds of fungi there to help it survive. And again, most of these beneficial fungi are called mycorrhizal fungi, and they are quite important. They when they connect to the roots of things, especially trees and so forth, they expand the amount of area in there so it can collect more water, it can collect more nutrients and so forth. And without them, trees, as well as many other plants, suffer badly and cannot survive. So folks, this is an important kind of feature. They need the fungi in order to survive. And that is, and this is true of 9 out of 10 of the world's plants. They need fungi in order for them to survive. Without fungi, the plant suffers badly, and in some cases, it can't survive at all without it. And this is also the case of things like lichen. Lichen, the old naturalist saying is when an algae takes a lichen to a fungus. And the idea is that a lichen is formed basically of mostly algae coming together to, with fungi to form the brand new type of organism, which is a lichen. And it's not just fungi, there's some other things as well, cyanobacteria, whatever. But again, fungi are incredibly important, and we're realizing more and more how important they are. Most people think, oh, if something's moldy, this and that, it's a bad thing. But in reality, there are incredibly beneficial fungi. And in fact, without them, many of our plants cannot survive. So anyways, before I continue on, and again, there's some neat things. And I saw that one of the presentations I think that's coming up is talking about the World Wide Web, as it were, the World Wide Plant Web, of how these things can actually talk to each other. And it's true. I know some of you folks may have seen some of the movies and so forth. I'm trying to remember the movie now. with all the blue people. I can't remember what the name of the movie is, but Avatar, that's what it is. But it's actually not too far from the tooth, folks. All of these things are interconnected, and I do a whole presentation in Nature's Puzzle of how interconnected. And it's hard to find something more interconnected than actually fungi and how they connect with everything else, and it's so necessary for the life cycle of all sorts of different kinds of plants and lichen. So, anyways, if there's any questions, I'll take them. If not, I'll continue on.
Yes, there is one question. How does one know what amendments have fungi in it?
So that's the interesting thing, and what a lot of people are doing now, and what they're trying to do here, and in fact, locally, some of these jurisdictions are trying it. They're mixing in a lot of the leaf mulch and so forth. As you know, many places they lose the leaves, and of course that's very bad because that's the hiding place, of course, of many different kinds of animals. But at the same time, though, there is fungi. There are spores which are on those leaves, and so by incorporating these leaves into the area, that especially can hopefully inoculate it with these proper types of fungi. Now there are experiments, and they're trying to do this now with some different kinds of orchids, where they'll introduce these beneficial fungi into the soil mix. But in reality, there's no guarantee that when you remove it from the pot it's carried in, that the fungi will survive. But again, it's something that people are starting to realize. But whenever you disturb the soil, and especially if you remove it, so if you have a construction project, you take everything out of there, you've really affected badly everything that can survive there. When you put something in there without the fungi and so forth that's there, the plants have a harder time surviving, and that's a problem. And that's been a problem when they're chewing street trees and stuff like that. You put them into a new area, and perhaps there's no fungi in these pits that they put them in, and perhaps they don't survive that way. It's what some people, I think, it's called basically the soil memory, as it were. It has a lot of the things that were in there before. So again, it's kind of hard to guess, but by including a lot of natural types of things, including leaves and so forth in there, that can sometimes inoculate that you have the right kinds of fungi. But sometimes it's a crapshoot. Sometimes they survive, sometimes they don't, because you don't know exactly which fungi you're introducing. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll continue.
Yes, there is one more.
Okay.
Does yeast serve as a third partner in lichen symbiosis?
What was the question? Does what? Yeast?
Does yeast serve
Yeah.
as a third partner in a lichen symbiosis?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Again, it's very specific types of fungi and cyanobacteria which form the partnership. There are thousands of different kinds of fungi, and again, I don't think that yeast is one that actually is one of these that's considered a mycorrhizal fungi.
Well, in the last 6 to 10 years,
Uh-huh.
scientists have found that there is yeast in as a third partner in many lichens, but
Wow.
it's not in all. And what they're finding right now is
Mhm.
that there is an entire community of microbials that act as partners in lichen symbiosis. If you want to learn more, my talk on the Wood Wide Web is going to be November 24th, and I'll
There
say
you
that.
go. And I didn't realize you're the one doing this. This is
I
this.
am.
There you go. So this ties in very well with this, and a wonderful type of thing. And again, I know that some people look at Avatar and think it's complete science fiction and this and that, but in reality, there is a lot of truth in the way that these things are all interconnected, and particularly the plants and the fungi and things like that. So there we go. So I will continue then, unless there's another question. All right, let's move on then. So, folks, here's another interesting type of thing, and this is actually what they call microheterotrophs or mycorrhizal cheaters. And so, for the longest time, let's look at this one on the bottom left. This right here is beech drops, and beech drops for the longest time they said, oh, beech drops are parasitic on the tree. Oh, they're not found anywhere except very close to beech trees. And so they realized that they're connected to the beech tree and things like that. And so they said for the longest time, beech drops are actually parasitic on the beech, but that's not the case at all. actually what it is that beech drops are actually parasitic on the mycorrhizal fungi, which is in the beech. So in reality, you need the beech, and then you have to have the mycorrhizal connections to the fungi in there. And then if you have those two things present, then you can get beech drops to grow. And this is a neat type of thing. So it's actually a menage a trois, as it were. You actually have three ways for these things to survive. Without them, the beech drop cannot exist by itself. Now, and that's the truth of many of these kinds of things. These guys, all of these things that we have here, the pine sap, the Indian pipes, the squaw root, the fall coral root, which is a kind of orchid, all of these are actually mycorrhizal cheaters. They don't depend so much on the plant, but they depend on the mycorrhizal associations tied in with the plant. And that's a very interesting combination that you have to have. Now, there is a problem, and since most of these are getting their nutrients from the mycorrhizal association with the plants, from the fungi, they don't need to be green. They don't have chlorophyll. They don't need to get that kind of, they don't need to get their nutrients that way. But there's a big problem, and that is if you're underground, you're surviving this way as a parasite, in this case on the fungi, you still need to get pollinated. And that's why once a year, many of these come up. They bring up these things. Many of them are ghostly kind of color because they don't really need colors. They're not any bright colors, no chlorophyll in them. And then those have to get pollinated. And once they're pollinated, they'll produce seeds, and hopefully the seed will land in an area where there is the proper fungi for this to happen again. So that's kind of a neat type of thing. So for the longest time, people always thought, oh, squaw root is parasitic on oak and beech drops on beeches and pine sap on pines. That is not the way that it actually is. In reality, they're feeding on the fungi. So it's a three-way type of solution. Now, before I finish with this, though, I want to show another aspect of this. The two ones in the bottom, both the beech drops and the fall coral roots, are very interesting because let's say, though, that you form a flower and nothing visits your flower. That can be a bad thing because without pollination, you've wasted all this energy, you formed this thing, and then you don't get pollinated. You can't produce any kinds of seeds. So some plants actually have a way of self-pollinating. So they don't form any kind of flower that is open to pollinators. No, what they do is a closed flower, what is called a cleistogamous flower. And these things, and cleistogamous basically means closed marriage, they basically self-pollinate. And so they're guaranteed that they will produce seeds. Now, in the long run, that is a problem because there is no genetic you don't have any crossing of pollen and this and that. So it's not an overall a big plus. But if you're producing this and you want to produce something, then by having cleistogamous flowers, you can do that. And some of the plants on both beech drops and some of the plants on fall coral roots. And by the way, just this last Tuesday is when I took this picture. Is my first time actually seeing fall coral root out there, and I was very lucky. I found it just in time for this presentation. But a neat little thing, and these are actually chasmogamous flowers. These are ones which are pollinated by insects. This one did not have the cleistogamous flowers, the ones that don't open and self-pollinate to guarantee that there will be something happening. And again, most of the time, it's advantageous for them to get pollinated, of course. They get the mixture of all the different genes and so forth. But just in case, these things have another way of actually of producing seeds in case they don't get visited by any kind of pollinator. Now, that leads us to this. And again, I mentioned this again, cleistogamous flowers, and that's different from chasmogamous flowers, which are the ones that we usually see. The beautiful little flowers, like for example, over here, you see these beautiful flowers right here of the violets, and over here you have a pale jewelweed, those are neat little plants. And they're very pretty, and most of the time they do get pollinators to visit them. But if they don't, then they have a way of producing seeds by themselves. It's not as big deal, but if anybody's wondered why violets, and again, we have probably some 24 kinds of violets here in Virginia, or I should say in the local district. But in reality, one of the reasons that they spread so far is that even if nobody visits, this is a common blue violet, and this is the Confederate form of it. If nobody visits these pretty flowers, it will still produce it'll still produce seeds. Because here's another one. Here's a Viola odorata. This is a sweet violet. This is one that's been introduced, but it's not native to here. This is what a Costocamus flowers looks like. It never opens up. Usually these flowers are right up close to the stem, ready to, right there. They're not up high, wide. There's no reason to attract any kinds of pollinators, anything like that. And that's especially important because if you're this, and again, the jewel weeds, what people call the touch-me-nots, they're an annual. And if you're an annual, you had better produce seed for next year, because if you don't, that's the end of your, that's the end of the life cycle for your plant in that area. So they'll form these beautiful flowers, and yes, they get visited by bees and hummingbirds, bumblebees especially, or whatever. But if they don't, right up close to the stem, they form a Cleistogamous flower. And then, if nobody visits them, usually the Cleistogamous flowers are formed after the flowers have produced and have already flowered. And so, if they don't get visited, then they cheat. They actually self-pollinate, and they produce at least some seed. Not great in the overall function of trying to get genes to transfer in this, but it's better to produce something, especially if you're an annual, than not produce anything. And so that's what many of these things do. So again, that's something called Cleistogamous flowers, and it's very present in several of our plants, especially the two common ones you see all the time are the two kinds of impatiens, the jewel weeds that we have. And again, there's probably 24 different kinds of violets which are local. And all of them, I have this, produce these Cleistogamous flowers usually after they produce the chesmogamous pretty flowers that we're so used to. So again, I'll be happy to take any questions on this, and otherwise I'll continue on to the next slide.
So we have 3 questions so far.
Okay.
Where can we find lady slippers in the DC area?
Oh, well, so there's a couple of places. And again, okay, so I don't want to, I'll give you a couple of parks and for 2 different kinds, okay? And the closest park where you want to see, for example, the pink lady slipper, and at least it used to be there, is over at Hidden Oaks Nature Center in Fairfax. That's got some really great, beautiful ones there that still are surviving and so forth, even in that built up kind of area. My favorite place to see the yellow lady slippers, the moccasin flowers, is in Linden, where they have some beautiful ones. And I usually do lead a walk there every year. Sometimes 2 or 3. I used to lead 3 or 4 at one time when I did a lot of the field trips and so forth. And I do take them. And one of the nice things we try to do is we try to show you what these things are. So in the Linden area, if you want to see yellow lady slippers, you want to go probably in the first week of May or so. It's second week maybe. If you want to see the pink lady slippers, that's usually the first week of June or so where you want to see them. There's many other places, but I'll just give you those 2 as an example of places where you can see these neat types of flowers. And of course, they're great to watch and take pictures of or whatever, but of course, don't ever try to move them because they can't survive. Okay, next question.
Can microheterotrophs grow only on the fungi?
So what was that? Can what grow on the fungi?
Can the microheterotrophic plants grow only on the fungi?
Yes, and it would only be on specific. So it's not like any kind of fungi will work. There are, and that's why, for example, beech drops, there is a specific group of fungi that are closely tied with beeches, and that's why they can connect to them, because it can't just be any fungi, just like it can't be just any plant. There's a very specific series of fungi that are associated with actually beech drops themselves, and that's true of all of the different things that we've been saying. It's very specific which ones they can go to. So with orchids, there are some where some are very specific. So yellow and pink lady slippers, moccasin flowers, they're much rarer, and part of it has to be because they're very specific about which kinds of fungi can associate with them. On the other hand, some other ones are more forgiving, and they can use a much wider variety of fungi. So things like the crane fly orchids and stuff like that, they're much more common. Why? Because they're not as picky about which mycorrhizal fungi that they're associated with. All right.
Thank you. How are underground plant seeds dispersed?
So that's the other reason to come up out of the ground. So not only you get pollinated, but here, let me go back real quick. So for example, this time, the Indian pipes. Once it gets pollinated, it turns very black. It's kind of scary looking. Another name for them are ghost plants or something. Anyways, and by the way, I've got some great blogs on some of these, so if you ever want to check up the blogs or whatever, I do have some great things. And this will turn black and straighten and straighten up. And when it does, it reaches up as high as it can. Why? Because any seeds that it produces then can be spread further away. And this is true of many of these different kinds of things. There's two purposes for it to coming up out of the ground. One to get pollinated, two for seed dispersal. There you go.
Fantastic. The last one is, what kind of insects are pollinating these orchids and beech shrubs and other mycoheterotrophs?
It really depends on which ones you're talking about. So if you go to this one, this is mostly pollinated by bumblebees. They're big enough to get in here. Then they kind of get lost inside there, pick up the pollen, and they got to get tricked again into another flower in order for this to kind of work. So for this, the main pollinators are in fact bumblebees, and in fact it's built for that. There are stories, for example, of the what is the name of that butterfly? The European skipper. And so the European skipper didn't evolve with this. And there's many stories where they'll find one of these, and the European skipper has found its way in there to try to to get some pollen and whatever, and then he can't get back out. So again, they're very specific pollinators which do these kinds of things. For this kind of orchid, it's mostly bumblebees. For cranefly orchids, and this is a great little story. I remember a bunch of people coming around there, and I was part of a moth group, and they found these moths, and they're like, look at this moth. There's something attached to its head. And then somebody finally figured out that what was attached to its head was a pollinarium. A pollinarium is a combination of pollens all put together, formed by certain plants, which include orchids. And so they're like, wow, it's a pollinia. That's the plural for a pollinarium. And so this would so they were like, wow, so this insect got this thing on them. What could it possibly be? And I was one of those people that said, well, you know what? One of the neat things about this is right now, when this post came out, is when the cranefly orchid was blooming. And somebody then finally made the connection, and they said, look, he's right. The cranefly orchid is in bloom, and that's one of these things that these moths are visiting, and they get the pollen on them. So the main pollinator for cranefly orchids appears to be certain species of moth. So again, it depends very much on different kinds of things. Again, many different things can visit this. This one I'm not sure about, because like I said, I just discovered that. So again, there's lots of different kinds of pollinators, but some are a little bit more specific than others. Part of nature's puzzle. Right? Any other questions? Otherwise, I continue onwards.
I would prefer we continue on, and we
if you have time
at the next break.
Yeah, there's lots of these things, lots of questions. So here we go. So here's the next thing. So here we look at photosynthetic animals. So here we are, and we talked about orchids and then eating other types of things. And then we looked at specifically some of these mycorrhizal cheaters that don't form any chlorophyll. They're not photosynthetic. They cheat and they take the food from the fungi. Where there are actually photosynthetic animals. And here are an example of a few of them. Many of these live in the ocean, and there's good reasons for that. So for example, many kinds of corals, as well as the giant clams, things in the Tridacna, I believe is the genus of these. And these are the largest invertebrates that we have. Largest mussels that we have. They live in a very specific area, just below in shallow water where sun comes through, because living inside of them and giving them these great colors are different kinds of zooanthellae, what they call dinoflagellate algae. Okay? It's algae, what makes up a lot of plankton, and they are stored and live inside of this. They get protection. These things protect them. They feed them, and so forth. And what they do is they provide food for things like corals and things, and some food for corals and some things like the giant clams. In fact, a lot of times when something happens and something kills the algae, when these things turn white, it's usually a pretty good indication that the animal is going to die. Once it expels the algae, which is so beneficial to it, it dies. And again, lots of things form this. So for example, another one that lives underneath the ground are many kinds of anemones. And here is one, and it's got those pretty colors. Why? Because again, there are these algae, which is these for living inside of it. And so it gives it another kind of food. So yes, this is a filter feeder, but corals and anemones oftentimes catch food, but sometimes the food is not there on a regular basis, and so it can survive by basically making this partnership with the algae. So that's one of them. Same thing with this. Here's a sea slug, and the same kind of idea. It's a photosynthetic sea slug. And then you go out of the water, and there's some really neat types of things. This, and they're looking at other kinds of insects to see if this is the case, but this is a pea aphid, and it has photosynthetic properties on it, and apparently it can survive a lot, even if it's not feeding, by getting energy from the sun because it's photosynthetic. And the latest discovering, and they're looking now at other kinds of salamanders, is this. So spotted salamanders have this have a certain kind of algae. In this case, it's in a genus Coophelia, and it's interesting. Um, uh, for the longest time, people have figured out that these salamanders, one of the reasons that they go to the same vernal pools is they can chemically detect that the algae is there. So they go to the very same places that they were born, and they think part of it is because they're focusing on and chemically tasting, as it were, that the algae is in there, and then they go in there and produce that. It turns out that after they lay their eggs, they're either clear or white, and very shortly afterwards, these things turn green. For the longest time, it's like, well, that's a good thing because it provides one, camouflage, and two, it can supply oxygen and so forth in there. And then we find out that actually this algae is actually contained, they think, in parts of the salamander, in the cells of the salamander. And so they're looking and seeing how functioning it is or whatever, but and they're looking at other kinds of things. But here is a salamander that does have this kind of algae growing on it, and it's something that they definitely need in order to survive, and that's why they go back into these pools that have this algae to find them. And again, this is just some examples of animals which have formed this partnership with plankton, algae, and have used it for their benefit, and in many cases for the benefit of the algae. They protect it and so forth. It's a nice, neat little thing which has happened for the longest time. Photosynthetic animals. So there you go. So there's that. I'll continue one more, and then I'll answer. I'll ask questions again, but actually two more, and that's this. I mean, most people know. Okay, so milkweed, yes, it is poisonous, and it's poisonous because the latex that comes out, has cardioglycosides in it. It's basically something that affects animals' heart, and so many animals know that you don't want to eat a lot of this because it can give you a heart attack. Well, I'll tell you something now. This is and it's true. Many of the animals that live on here, they take this toxins that the plant produces, and they store them. So that's why monarchs taste bad to other things. Why? Because they've stored the cardioglycosides to protect them. And many of them have these bright orange, black colors, good warning colors, aposematic colors. These are warning colors in nature. So when someone sees these colors, they know, oh, there's something about this animal that, how it's protecting itself. And that's why milkweed bugs and milkweed beetles and all of them have those same kinds of colors, because again, they're getting some protection from them. But it's not as simple as that. So here I am, and what am I eating? I'm eating milkweed. This is common milkweed. And here's the thing. Early on, when it first comes out, it does not have a lot of cardioglycosides in it. It still has some of the latexy sap in it, but it's remarkably sweet. You eat this thing, and it's a wonderfully sweet type of thing. Now, if I were to eat it later on, that would mean then yes, it could protect itself because it's got the cardioglycosides. But in reality, many things out there they say are supposedly poisonous and so forth. But in reality, it depends on what kind of what part of the life cycle and so forth looking at them. I did a whole hour-long conversation called a milkweed safari, and we talk about how useful milkweeds have been in so many different kinds of ways. But again, here is something that's supposedly poisonous, but only during certain stages of it and so forth. And otherwise, believe it or not, it is an edible plant, even though many people will say, hey, it's poisonous. Oh, I'm sorry. So again, I'll stop there. And if there's any questions, and I'll go on with one more story and another interesting thing having to do with the confusion of what's poisonous and what's not poisonous.
All right, so let me scroll back. So we have, sorry.
Yep.
How can the algae grow on the salamanders if the salamanders live underground?
So it's actually in the cells of the salamander. So that it somehow penetrates the cell of the salamander. And so it's not on top of the salamander, it's inside the salamander. It's actually something that you have to actually look at the individual cells to see that there is actually this Ophelia, what's it, amblyomatomus, which is the name of mole salamanders. It actually is stored inside the cell of the animal. And now they're trying to look at, because some people are convinced that it's actually not just inside the cell, but even goes and penetrates the nucleus of the actual cells themselves. There you go. Any other questions?
Would you like to comment on the seed dispersal of violets?
Well, I will. Hold on, because it's coming right up in another slide. So hold on. I will answer that in detail in one of the other slides.
All right, great. So that's it for now.
Okay, so here's an interesting thing. Here's Eastern black nightshade. And again, anything in the nightshade family, Solanum, any of these things have a interesting history behind them. Many people have heard of deadly nightshades and so forth. Now, even though some of these plants are edible, or parts of them are, so for example, tomatoes and potatoes are part of it, but eating green tomatoes green potatoes can be poisonous, and eating the leaves of the flowers of the things of the tomatoes can be poisonous. So I remember when this first came up, I saw this plant and it didn't have berries. Well, actually it did have a couple of berries, but I didn't really notice, but I noticed the flower, and that's very distinctive. This is a flower that I knew was in the nightshade family. So she came up to me and said, look, this grows in my country. And she's from Central America, from El Salvador. And she's like, wow, this, we eat this all the time in my country. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. There are lots of differences between the plants in Central America and the plants here. And this flower, I'm telling you right now, many members of the family are extremely poisonous. And I told her about, things like the deadly nightshade and stuff like that. So wouldn't you know it, a couple of days later, I'm eating the soup and she goes, well, what do you think? Do you like the soup? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's very interesting. I've not tasted this, but this tastes really good. And then she goes, well, I told you I put mora in there. And mora, so I thought it was in Peruvian Spanish, that means mulberry. Okay. And I'm like, wow, it doesn't taste like mulberry. And then I realized it wasn't Peruvian Spanish. She was telling me Salvadoran Spanish. And for them, this meant that it was this plant, black nightshade. And I'm like, whoa, I think this is poisonous. So really quickly, I'm looking for the poison control number, and I'm looking very carefully to see if I can identify anything on it. And I got mixed results, because some of them said right away, this is poisonous. Other ones said it's actually edible. And guess what? It actually is edible. I'm not dead. I still survived. You can eat the leaves, you can eat the berries. This annual comes up all the time. And now I purposely spread the seeds out to get it every year, because I enjoy it in my yard. But here is the thing, that if you were just to read the books, some of them will tell you that this is poisonous. It's probably confused with some of the other kinds of things which are similar looking, but this is actually a native plant, which in many of the books is poisonous, but in reality, it is not. And again, this is something I actually did a thing in ethnobotany or whatever, a presentation last night. And here's one of the big things. If you read something, most of the things that are being supplied are just, they repeat what someone else has said. And so you have to be very careful when somebody says that either something is edible or it's poisonous or it's medicinal, whatever it is, because many of these people have not actually tested these things out. And so they're just repeating what it is. So you can't always trust what someone says, because in this case, many of them will tell you this is deadly, and it really isn't. It actually is an edible plant, much like the milkweed, which gets a bad reputation, even though it is an edible plant. So that's a little thing about Eastern black nightshade. Again, it's a variety of different species, but it's all in the same family as Solanum. So a neat little plant. So I'll go to this one. This has a very interesting story. So this is Jimson weed, or devil snare, and the story behind this is like this. This plant, again, is toxic, extremely so. In fact, it's psychedelic in the ways that it in the effects that it produces and things like that. The name Jimson weed is a corruption of Jamestown weed. And way back when, even before the American Revolution, there was another revolt against the British. In this case, it was Bacon's Revolution. And Nathaniel Bacon, many of the people supporting him, again, they were arguing
Oh,
about
boo. I
unfair.
want to watch a movie again.
They were actually about unfair taxes, and they were also worried about the other things that the British soldiers did. And so they started rebellion, and right away the British sent the redcoats over to put this rebellion down. And when they got in there, one of the things that they were arguing about was when British soldiers came in, you had to offer them safety. You had to give them a place to stay. They could eat your food, all this kind of stuff without recompense. And so they didn't like this, and so right away they hid away a lot of the food stores. Well, the British could not find foods that they could eat, but they did notice these little things growing on the plants, and so they ate them up, which was a huge mistake. It's very psychedelic. It can really affect your mind and so forth. And so, certainly, right afterwards, some of them were running around naked, some of them were hanging upside down, some were just talking gibberish, all because they had eaten this, and it is extremely psychedelic. Now, it is poisonous, and that is, they basically, it was Jamestown weed became Jimson weed after a while, but that's where the Jimson weed comes from. It's a neat little plant. A lot of sphinx moths and things like that visit it, but it is psychedelic, and that psychedelic feature and some of the effects that it has on people has been used by quite a bit in Virginia in particular. Well, actually, all along the coastal plains, the main tribes along there are all Algonquin speaking people, and in Virginia in particular, many of the tribes along here, including the Powhatans, the Potomacs, and all of these, the Mattaponi, all of these different tribes, they actually took this as part of a ritual, a very important ritual, because they only did every 2 or 3 years. This is when you became, from a boy, you turned into an adult voting, an adult member of the tribe. In this case, you became a warrior after you took this kind of thing. And so they'd starve themselves, they eat this kind of stuff, they go on these little vision quests, if you were, they'd forget everything there was before, and then what would happen is that would become the biggest rite for them. I think it was called the Huskana, this big important rite that allowed them to be an adult member of their tribe. And again, it's very significant to what they did, but in reality, a very poisonous plant. The first time actually, I remember seeing this around here. I remember many years ago, some teens coming over and I said, "Hey, do I have the tourist harmonium growing here?" And I'm like, "Wow, he knows the scientific name." But the reason he knows the scientific name is because he wanted to smoke some of these things because of the very cheap but very, very dangerous high that you get from eating this particular psychedelic plant. But it's important in this case, very important to the religion of the original Algonquin speaking people, particularly here on the coastal plains in Virginia. So that's a little bit about Jimson weed. So here, one more little thing I want to talk about is, and that is how, again, the interconnectedness of different kinds of things. These are oil beetles, okay, and they're very large beetles. You can see them a lot even this time of year. They move around, and they protect themselves because they have a kind of oil, a blistering agent, it's called cathardin, which protects them. Well, it just so happens that this other beetle, these are fire-colored beetles, they actually collect the blistering agent from them. They annoy these things. This guy protects himself by letting out some of this blistering agent. They collect it so that they can lay their eggs, and now their eggs are protected from the blistering agent. This is a kind of blister beetle, okay? So if you touch it, you get the stuff on you, it can irritate, give you blisters and things like that, but that's how they protect their young. And so a neat little combination here, you have these things harvesting what can be a poison from this guy in order to benefit themselves, protect their eggs. And that is what these guys do on a yearly basis. And I apologize, I did take these pictures, obviously, and they're not, they're not the highest quality because it's me taking the pictures. So there you go. So I'll do one more and then I'll stop for questions. And that is this. So this is a killdeer, and many animals do this, but probably no one is more famous for doing this than the killdeer themselves. So this is a shorebird. It actually doesn't have to live by the shore, but it does like open areas, sometimes nests on roofs and things like that. And as you can tell, the eggs are extremely camouflaged. They lay them on there. They don't build much of a nest, and you can see it actually looks just like the ground itself. But if you come too close, right away this animal starts yelling and starts calling and so forth, running away as though it has a broken wing. Expands its wings, it jumps, but before you can get too close, it always seems to get away. And it's a fake act. What it's doing is it's feigning the broken wing act. And so it leads you as far away as you can from their young or their babies. And then guess what? When it's far enough away and you can't possibly go back and find their egg or whatever, eggs again, it flies away because it's never injured. It's just tricking you into doing this. And several birds do this, but none of them is more famous than the killdeer with its broken wing neck. And this is, I took this picture right here in one of our lots here in Arlington. And again, once I found, and I knew when it was running away doing this kind of thing, because I got reported by some of our guys, some of our parks were like, oh my God, there's a bird with a broken wing over there. And I came over and I saw, I said, whoa, be careful where you're walking. Why? Because it's not really with a broken wing. We're right near its nest. And we discovered there was its nest. We protected it. And very soon, so we raised this guy. And again, it was all knowing that this guy was just trying to trick me with this broken wing act. So anyways, that's kind of a thing. Is there any questions? Otherwise, I'll continue on to the next one. All right, we'll continue on.
So we have one question.
Okay.
Is Jimson weed native to the DC area?
So that is a very interesting question, because it was certainly here well before colonists came over, way before Europeans arrived, okay? By some definitions, that means that it would be native, but there's also some folks that think it was carried over by the indigenous people, and that's why it's here. So it's one of those that if you look up, in some places it'll either say native or it'll say introduced. It's one of those that I guess the ruling is still out. Is it really native because it was here before Europeans came over, or is it something that was introduced by the native people themselves? But that, that's the best answer I can give, because people are not 100% sure. All right.
Thank you. That's all for now.
There you go. So moving on board. So here's an interesting thing. So there's a lot of neat things about this. This is actually, this is a two-toed sloth, and I got this on one of the beaches right near Panama down in Costa Rica. And it's really neat. For them, here they're eating it without any problems whatsoever because they've evolved with it and so forth. So that's kind of a neat thing. They can eat a poisonous plant, and it's not poisonous to them. It's actually very tasty, as we will see in the video very quickly. Now, the other thing about it is that this animal, and this is true of all different kinds of sloths, there's a lot of neat things about sloths. And one of them is that they grow algae on their fur. It's certain types of algae. It grows on there, and camouflaging, it looked just like a big bunch of algae growing up in the trees or something, but different things live on there. There's at least 5, maybe 6 different species of moth that live in the fur of the sloth. They actually, their caterpillars feed off of the algae and that grows on there, as well as the moths. Now, about once a week or so, the sloth comes on down. And it's really cool. I remember when I found one down in Peru, actually, way down in the ground, and they're so awkward when they're on the ground, but they have to come down to defecate. And when they do that, the moths fly off of them, lay their eggs in this in the actual dung of the actual sloth itself. I'm sorry, I misspoke. So the caterpillars don't live on the fur, it's the moths. The caterpillars actually live in the dung, and they're caprophagic. They feed on the dung, and that is what their main food source is. And then they fly off and they live as adults on a sloth. So a very neat little type of thing. And again, very quickly, I'll show you this quick little thing, and I won't let it go for too long, but just so you can kind of see a little bit about mama sloth and how they're eating, again, a bitter almond, which if we were to cust it, we would get blisters on our mouths and on our hands and so forth. So let's see if this works, or maybe not. Oh, maybe it does. Here we go. Let's see if this works. And again, this is off of a beach, down in Costa Rica, not even 5 miles from the Panama frontier. And again, it does not look like it's working. All right, folks. So that didn't work too much. So that's okay. We're a little bit behind, anyways. We'll move on to the next slide. So. All right, gotta stop this, I guess, first. So how do I stop this now? Now it doesn't want to go. So I don't know why it does not want to. How can I end this real quick?
If you look right next to the pause sign, you're
Here's
going to see.
And there, now it comes on. Wouldn't you know it? Now it comes on. So again, these are bitter almonds, and here's the baby, and he's going to actually share the bitter almond with them. And again, if we were to touch it, we'd. Oh, sorry. Okay, it's not working for me. Well, we'll continue on. But that is that. Now I won't flip on any more videos because that didn't work too good. You were saying though how I can. There we go. So there are a lot of things which are coprophagic. I know doesn't make much sense, but many animals actually feed on dung. For some, it's an obvious type of thing because the rabbit, unlike some of the other larger animals that feed on plants, it actually, in order to get the most effective use of the actual things that it's eating, it actually poops the first time, eats the second time, and by the second time, it's usually slimy and green. It goes through, gets as much nutrients as it can. After the second time, then it becomes these hard little, drops of little pellets of dung that are no longer that they won't eat again, but they will eat their poop in order to make the maximum use of what's in there. And of course, the most famous ones are, of course, the dung beetles, who, of course, roll these biggest pieces that they can into a new place. And that's how they raise their young inside there, because they're also dung eaters. There are many fish who are also specialists on eating dung. A neat little thing, and I did mention a little bit about ants, and we'll get to them. So here's a neat little thing, and again, I've had my personal encounters with this as well. So this is a bullhorn acacia. Bullhorn acacia has these big, huge spines on them, and that protects it from big animals. Things like cows and horses don't eat them because that protects them. But it doesn't do anything about insect predators. They'll come on there, and so what they do is each of these little places is hollow, and they can be opened up so that ants can live. And again, it's only one kind of ant, okay, this particular kind of ant, which lives inside the spines. Everything that it depends on is from the spines. Not only does it feed on any animals that come to try to prey on it, any kinds of things that want to eat the bullhorn acacia, but the bullhorn acacia even has these extrafloral nectaries. They provide food specifically for them. And so they're called Belgian bodies. And so they feed on this. So everything is tied in with this. So if you were to look up inside, look what you get. Here are the ants. And these are tiny little ants that protect them. And they may be tiny, but they're stinging ants. And many things, many ants can sting, and these guys definitely can. Over here, you can see how this guy is already arched over. That's how, when it's disturbed, that's how it's going to sting you. And boy, do those things really hurt. I remember my relatives down there, they love to, they love to show you that even though I'm a naturalist in the US, that doesn't mean I know anything about life in Latin America. And so I remember the first time they're like, hey, look at this plant or whatever. And I grabbed the plant to kind of look at it, knowing full well, or them knowing full well, that these little ants were going to come out and sting me. And they really do sting. Powerful little types of things. And again, that is how they protect their plant. So the plant depends on the ant, and the ant depends on the plant. If a bullhorn acacia grows for too many years and does not have an ant colony or colonies on it, it ceases to exist. It cannot survive predation from other kinds of things. And the only place you ever find this species of ant is on bullhorn acacia. Again, they both absolutely need each other. The plant needs the ant needs the plant. And that is the way it is in many of these different kinds of mutualisms when they're mutually dependent upon each other. So there you go. I'll go just two more, and then I'll stop again. The other thing is, locally, there are a lot of ant cows. So ant cows are aphids and scale insects and tree hoppers that ants protect. So they'll protect them from things like ladybugs and things like that. And why do they do it? Because as you can see here, this guy they'll stroke the aphid, and the aphid it lets out a sweet tasting little substance that the ants absolutely love. And so again, the ant helps the aphid helps the ant. And again, that's how it is in most of the world. These ants, and again, they call these things in general ant cows. And they can be tree hoppers, can be aphids, even some scale insects. They are all, when they're being cared for by ants, they come under general term that they're ant cows, because the ants are tending them and they're milking them to get the, to be able to get some of the stuff that they really want. And so it's a neat little thing. That's a thing about ants. Let me finish with ants with just two more things. And then I'll be happy to stop for more questions. And that is myrmecoccary, and that's seed dispersal by ants. And it's very specific. We're in a hotbed of seed dispersal, myrmecoccary, in the world. Here, Africa, different places like that, plants have developed to really be dependent on ants spreading their seeds. This is how it works. So here you have the seed. In this case, this is probably from a bloodroot. And on the outside of this, so this is a bloodroot seed. And then the outside is something what's called an elaiosome. It kind of wraps up around there. The elaiosome is very tasty to the ants. In fact, and it's not every ant. There's certain species of ants that really like this. And not only that, but some kinds, they think that for certain species, there's a pheromone that even attracts the ants. And there's a reason it does it, because the ant comes by, he picks up the seed and takes it back to their nest. Right away, he rips off the tasty edible part and he throws the other part away. But what he's done is they put it into their garbage dumps, and their garbage dumps are underground, protected. So basically what the ants are doing is planting it underground in a fertile type of area, protected. These are very rich little soil areas where all these things are decomposing. So it's very, very important, because especially with bloodroot, if you don't have this elaiosome removed, in reality, it's like there have been some local studies being done. It has a much less chance of germinating. So they really do need the ant. And about 30% of our spring flowers depend on ants to spread their seeds. And here are just a few of them. And one of the things are most of the violets. Most of the violets, as I mentioned, they form seeds, and whether it's a chasmogamous flower or a cleistogamous flower, whether it opens up or it self-pollinates, will have these elaisomes, which ants just absolutely love. And they're the main spreaders of this. So next time you're cursing the ants because they're on picnic tables and stuff like that, you should also thank them, because again, they're the main reason that we have many of our spring wildflowers. And in some cases, the flowers would not exist very well without them. So that's myrmecoccary plants. So now I'll be happy to take some questions and so forth. And otherwise, I'll continue on.
Reminder, Alonso, that we are at the 8 o'clock mark. So at this time, I will stop taking questions until the end.
Okay, so that's good. I apologize. I did go over, I think, taking the questions. I couldn't hear you. So do I have any time left, or is that it, basically?
No. Please continue your presentation. We'll just get the questions at the end of your presentation.
Okay. All right. I'll continue on then. You're breaking up a little bit, but I'll continue on with the last couple of slides. And that is milkweed. Everyone knows that, as I mentioned, milkweed, wonderful for pollinators. That's all true. But there's specific pollinators which are built to do this. Things like larger butterflies and bumblebees. They come in here, step inside here, and then their feet can pull out this pollinia, which I already mentioned, and same thing in orchids, and pull it out. But if they're not strong enough to do them, they can get stuck. And again, I have a video of this too, but I didn't put it on here. So honeybees can get stuck on there. Moths can get stuck, flies can, and they can die. Here's a small little sweat bee. Here's another kind of moth. All of these things trying to get the nectar, but because they're not the right thing, the right pollinator for them, they get trapped, and in many cases they can die. And it's neat because you can see other animals have learned to do this, and they'll go over these flower heads to pick up the dead insects which have been trapped alive and die on these milkweed traps. So again, milkweed's great for pollinators, but it's the right kind of pollinator that's supposed to pollinate it. And again, last thing about things, most people know that caterpillars have specific host plants. Well, it's also true of bees. So we have about 450 or so bees in both Maryland and Virginia, and about 30% of them are specialists, meaning that they need a specific kind of flower, the pollen from that flower, in order to reproduce. They may be able to visit other ones for nectar, but if they want to reproduce, they got to have these types of flowers. It's what they call the oligolectic bees. And so here are just an example of some of the many kinds of things. Blueberries have 11 different kinds of bees that need blueberries or they can't reproduce. Same thing with goldenrods. 12 bee specialists that have to have it or they can't reproduce. So when we plant stuff, diversity is very important. And if you're looking at bees, you have to be very specific about which kinds of things you put out there. And now here is an interesting little thing. This is a living zombie, okay, not a zombie apocalypse. So in this case, here is a catalpa worm, and this is the back end of it. Actually, there's a spine on there, and it's got all of these cocoons. These are the inside of it have been completely eaten away. All the vital parts have been eaten. So this is a goner. It's basically moving that way, and out of there comes out the parasitoid. It kills it. This kills the animal. Even if you pull these off of here, it's not going to matter because the answer because it's a living zombie. It's dead. And I'm not going to go into the video that I had before. But here's, oops, hello. Hey, can you guys hear
Yes,
me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I lost you for a second. So I better wrap up very quickly, although now it doesn't want to advance. What I wanted to show you, I don't know why it does not want to advance anymore. But the next one was actually something that I think you would be very interested in, and that is a zombie fungus. It's cordyceps, and in this case, another thing that I took a picture of in Costa Rica. And there's many of these different kinds of fungi which live inside and alter the behavior of these animals. Zombie fungi, as it were, that change the behavior and absorb it. And again, for whatever reason, my computer is no longer wanting to continue. So I think we may have to end it there. I apologize, but I don't know why. I must have a really bad connection or something. It just does not want to move onwards.
Yes, your connection is breaking up a little bit.
Man, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm at work. Do you figure I have a good connection here?
Thank you so much, Alonso.
Yeah, I will be there, but lots of great little types of things. I didn't go into bioluminescence, which includes fungi and all sorts of different things. But again, there's a lot of neat little miracles out there that if you looked at them, there's just so many of them. And I do want to end with that. This is such a very small look at a very small amount of the wonders of nature and the mysteries of nature that I hope as naturalists you continue to just look at and learn from.
Fantastic, Alonso. If you want, you can stop sharing the slides, so maybe that will improve a little bit while we ask you a couple questions that were in the chat.
Yes, please do.
So do the killdeer always lay their eggs on the ground?
Yes, on the ground or on building tops. We used to have it here in the Central Library here, and it has that gravel type top to it, and they would lay eggs on there. But it is open areas. That's where they lay them. But in this case, they're using a different kind of underground. They're using the roof of the building. And I can't seem to even escape.
No problem.
Get rid of the can't even get rid of the actual slideshow. But here.
No problem. So
right.
next question, is the algae in the spotted salamander skin considered an organelle?
Couldn't hear all of it. It had to do with the algae. They're very specific to what types of algae and where they can grow. It's almost always in vernal pools. And that is one of the reasons that these animals go straight to vernal pools rather than any place else.
So the question was, is the algae in the skin of the spotted salamander an organelle?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, now you're sounding better. Thank goodness. I apologize. I don't know why the connection went bad, but Again, there's lots of cool things there. You'll be able to share if I send you this PDF. Will you be able to share that with the people, and that way they can also look at the last couple of slides, which had to do with bioluminescence, which I didn't include.
Oh, that would be wonderful. So, is the algae an organelle in the skin of a salamander or a symbiont?
I could not hear you.
Okay. No
Yeah,
problem.
I apologize. I'm having a really bad connection apparently, and I don't know why, because I'm at work with my work computer, but it's not.
So here we have a catalpa sphinx
Oh,
moth.
now look what came
caterpillar,
up. It's actually the.
and it is completely parasitized by braconid wasps.
Yeah.
Those little cocoon-like things on its back are actually cocoons from the wasp.
Yeah,
itself.
for whatever reason here now
So
it's actually
this is a
playing.
walking zombie.
It's actually playing.
The braconid wasps are
that.
parasitoids. They actually kill its host. So
Yeah.
what they've done.
Okay. That is probably what's eating up your bandwidth.
Yeah, that definitely is telling me it does not want to cooperate. You know what it was? I think as soon as I started trying to share videos, that's when it stopped doing this. So I definitely think it has to do. I should not have started sharing the videos. That definitely caused everything to go bad for me. I apologize.
No problem. So if you're still with us, I thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you for your support. What I want to do is share the chat with Alonso. So if he wants to answer some of the lingering questions, he'll be able to do that. I had a comment from Amy Casagnol that she has seen lady slippers in Sligo Creek. Thank you, Amy. And I had another comment, although I can't remember from who, that in a PBS documentary, she saw koala babies eating the droppings from the mom to incorporate the microbial flora to be able to digest the eucalyptus leaves. So thank you so much, Alonso. As always, this has been so wonderful to have you with us. And thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight in a place where you have so many options. We're always grateful that you choose us.